For 6 decades, the James Bond character has been alive in our culture, and for 5 of those decades, he has inspired many a filmmaker, from Terrence Young to Sam Mendes. And with thanks to the producers as well as the fans, Bond has remained alive and well. Spectre marks the 24th official installment in this series, and as if that were not impressive enough, Bond is still relevant, and, oh yeah, he's still got it. Spectre. I am so happy to say, after so many months of waiting for this movie, I enjoyed it. The story follows James Bond as he goes rogue to solve a case that leads him to the organization Spectre. He very quickly finds himself on the run and on the hunt for answers, and the further he goes, the deeper he digs, the more his youth comes into focus. For 17 years of my life, James Bond has been a character very close to my heart. My sister and I both grew up on the films. My dad, whose first Bond film was Goldfinger, introduced me to him. I was about 6 and had no idea at all what was going on. Today, I have a much better idea of what's going on, and like with Skyfall, I was able to enjoy Spectre with my dad and a near sold-out crowd in IMAX in San Francisco. And while this film was not shot using IMAX cameras, it was shot using 35mm film. And for those of us who share a love for film, it's reassuring that in today's digital age, Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli, the producers, allowed Sam Mendes to shoot on the same format that years ago Ted Moore shot Dr. No on. And that, combined with the fact that both Hoyt van Hoytema and Lee Smith worked on this film, makes Spectre the closest we have come to a Chris Nolan James Bond movie. Just a tad more, and we're there. What I liked about this movie is how it paid tribute to past Bond films while also going deeper into Bond's past. Skyfall took us to where Bond grew up. In Spectre, we learn about what happened after Bond's parents died, and that detail leads to one man and one organization, Blofeld and Spectre. It's been a long time since Spectre was involved in the James Bond plot, and I recall when the press conference for this movie took place and the title was revealed, I was shocked because, to me, naming a James Bond movie Spectre is like naming a Batman movie Arkham Asylum, or just, Arkham. Not to say it's a bad title, it's actually really cool, and the coolest part is, by reviving Spectre, it allowed the filmmakers to connect the last 3 films together, and as a result, for the first time in Bond history, there is a consistent story anthology. And by doing that, it helps fit Bond into more of a modern franchise model where, like with Marvel for instance, while you have different characters and stories, it's all connected. And I think going down that path is important because moving forward, for the future, it's going to help Bond stay relevant and exciting. For me, one of the most satisfying things about this movie is how the action is done for real. And that is thanks in large part to special effects guru Chris Corbould. He is responsible for the Dark Knight trilogy, the Brosnan Bond films, and the Craig Bond films. With him on their team, all those filmmakers could and did achieve action grounded in reality, and Spectre is no exception. Corbould and his team pulled off some pretty amazing action scenes. And especially with the ones in this film, they showcase really well how Bond is an in-the-moment thinker who pursues at all costs and never gives up. It's also thanks to these scenes that it reminds one of just how physically demanding a James Bond movie is. The good news is Craig is still fit and able to pull off what he's allowed to do. And with this film, he needs all the muscle and brain power he can muster because Spectre provides 3 villains, one of whom is physical, 2 of whom are intellectual forces. Dave Bautista is the physical force, and his character is as physically imposing as he is a necessary presence. The last physical bad guy we got was way back in Die Another Day with Gustav Graves. The last physical henchman was Stamper in Tomorrow Never Dies. Hinx is a return, not only to the physical bad guy, but also to a Jaws type. And just like with Jaws, whenever he walks into a room, without uttering a single word, you know he will never stop pursuing Bond. As for the intellectuals, we are first introduced to C, played by Andrew Scott. He turns out to be a double agent working for Blofeld and is operating within MI6 to destroy the 00 program. That may make the movie sound busy, but it actually adds a compelling and dramatic side story that allows M to be more involved both in the office as well as out in the field. We then of course have Blofeld, and finally, my wish has come true. He gets a backstory, and we see the origin of his bad eye through a watch bomb. It's a very interesting choice making the watch bomb the culprit because by doing so, the filmmakers make Bond responsible for the bad eye. And on top of that, time then becomes a physical metaphor for an injury the character had when we first met him in Thunderball 50 years ago. The last time we saw his character was in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And for diehard fans, there are a lot of nods to that film as well as other Bond films, one of which is a medical facility atop a snowy mountain, very much like in Secret Service. But unlike Secret Service, the medical facility in this movie is where our main Bond girl, Madeleine Swan, resides. She is played by Lea Seydoux. I became aware of her through Blue is the Warmest Color, and if you watch that film, you'll see she has all the right qualities for a Bond girl. Her character actually kind of reminds me of Tracy from Secret Service, because her father is the one that sets Bond up with her, and while marrying her isn't the intent, her father, Mr. White, gives Bond her location to him so he can go to her and make sure she stays alive. And then, just like with Tracy, Madeleine at first refuses, but then eventually, yes, she warms up to Bond, and they become a couple of sorts, and by the end they are basically together. The best part is, she doesn't die, unlike Tracy, and so it opens up the opportunity for a brand new future for Bond. Beautiful. Our other Bond girl, played by Monica Bellucci, is one for the books. At 50, she is the oldest Bond girl cast, but from a story point of view, it makes sense. Her character is a neglected widow, and in true Bond fashion, she is an attractive widow. Thinking through this whole movie, there are a lot of very small moments that I love, but my favorite scene would have to be the opening scene, because it demonstrates how the Bond films borrow from whatever movie is most popular at the time and effectively use elements from them to extraordinary effect. In Moonraker, it was the space setting in lieu of Star Wars. In this movie, it's the Birdman single take. My notes for improvement fall under story choices and the pacing. This is the slowest Bond movie in a long time. And even though it isn't the best example because the pacing of that movie didn't bother me, the pacing of this film reminds me of Interstellar's pace, because both films take their time to get from story beat to story beat. With regard to story choices, there's a few. I will begin with Dave Bautista's character. He's written as a silent pursuer and has 4 scenes in total, and in the last one, it's a train fight, his entrance is random. On top of that, the scene ends with him being dragged off the train by a chain that's been wrapped around his neck, and that's his exit from the movie. It's quite reminiscent of the Jaws fight in The Spy Who Loved Me. And when the movie ended, one of many thoughts I had was, that's not how you end a Bond villain. Given how the film plays out, what I think they should have done is used the explosion in the desert as the means to his end. Yes, it would have been very over the top, but it would have been so much more epic and dignified. The second choice concerns the car chase. It ends with Bond using the ejector seat to escape the car before it dives into water. Now, the escape itself is really cool and fun, but I'm not a big fan of the car finishing off in the water. It's a slight conclusion to a very dramatic buildup. The third choice is the torture scene. This time it's Bond's skull. Blofeld is at the helm of a needle that is puncturing both sides to eliminate his eyesight and then his memory. It's not a bad idea for a scene, but unlike the torture in Casino Royale, this torture is engineered more as a means for Blofeld to give Bond and us his backstory. And the problem with that is, it takes away tension from the torture, and since the torture itself ultimately does nothing, we're left wishing for a scene that plays out more like the one in Goldfinger or Casino Royale, both of which had really good tension. The final choice is when Madeline Swan essentially leaves Bond during the finale only to be captured by Blofeld. It's a very obvious and cliché route that did not excite me, and especially given how far she'd gone with Bond at that point in his journey, her leaving is very random and awkward. And the second she left, I knew she'd be made a damsel in distress. I also knew Bond would save her. The filmmakers could have been a lot more original. With all that said, looking forward, I am very curious to see if the structure of these films will change given how this film ends. Because what I want to see happen next is the wedding for Bond and Swan, and the filmmakers could use that event as a means for an attack on Bond, and that's Bond's call to action. But unlike with in Secret Service, do not have the bride die. With the right director, I am confident that would play out well. As for this movie, I am very glad that I saw it in IMAX. Bond films always have been and always will be crafted for theater experiences, and the IMAX scale echoes the literal scale of these films, as well as the emotion behind the romance and the locations. Let's also not forget one of the key trademarks of any Bond movie, the title sequence. The one in this film brought to mind the titles from Spider-Man 3, because they show characters from the past movies. It is the second time now the sequence relates to the story. I liked it a lot. I also really enjoyed Sam Smith's Writings on the Wall. He is one of my favorite artists right now, and the song is, I think, one of the best in the series. And speaking of the best, I said in my Bond 50 video that ranking all the Bond films was just too crazy for me, and that is still true. But I am comfortable with ranking all of Craig's films. So, from top to bottom, here we go. Casino Royale, Spectre, Skyfall, and Quantum of Solace. Now contractually, I believe Craig has one more film, but I don't know if he actually wants to do that one more film. So, if he does, awesome, because I love him as Bond. He is my favorite Bond. But if not, and he moves on, then I am just glad he was cast in the first place. And I will always be thankful for Casino Royale, because for me that is an essential Bond film, and the one I am still waiting to be topped. And with all that said, I give Spectre 3.5 out of 5 stars. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Have an awesome day.